Okay, we're going to be talking in this video about microanatomy of skeletal muscle tissue. We've talked about a lot of the macroanatomy of the actual structure of the skeletal system, but we're going to be talking about the different tissue types and the different types of connective tissue that connect the various levels of organization of muscle tissue. So we have one new root word to recognize, that is mys or myo, meaning muscle. So our first learning objective is I can put in order from largest to smallest the following parts of a skeletal muscle: the fascicle, the myofiber or muscle fiber, and muscle. So our largest section of skeletal muscle tissue that we're looking at here is the whole muscle itself. It consists of a collection of fascicles, which are these sort of pepperoni pizza looking structures right in here. Each skeletal muscle is surrounded by a connective tissue layer called epimysium, this really thick layer right on top here. You can see within the epimysium veins, arteries, and nerves, bringing necessary blood supply. As we have talked about already, muscle tissue is all very vascular, so it all has to have blood supply running through it, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into smaller structures. So now as we get into the fascicle, you can see it looks very, very similar to the entire skeletal muscle as a whole, with one or two really easily distinguishable differences. And one of the things that really distinguishes the difference in our fascicles here, if you look right around here, any of these little green structures right here, those are going to be our nuclei. So the nuclei for the actual individual myofibers or muscle fibers that the fascicle contains. The fascicle is surrounded by perimysium, which is the middle layer of connective tissue, and it contains these individual muscle fibers. Again, you can see in the perimysium the veins and the arteries and the nerves that run to these. So again, you can see the little green nuclei right in here. And in here you can't see them because they're too small. Each of these individual little circles is going to be one of our myofibers. And then right here, this is also a myofiber. So to get into the myofiber itself, a myofiber you may also see referred to as a muscle fiber. The two terms are interchangeable in this case. This is the cellular level of a muscle. And in previous chapters, we had talked about cells having the suffix cyte or cyte, like a fat cell is called an adipocyte. It's a little bit different in the myofiber because the cells are so long that they're distinguished by that different name. You can see in this interstitial space within the cell, you can see mitochondria, you can see the nucleus. As you might remember from what we talked about earlier, myofibers are multinucleate cells because they are so long that they require a lot of different control centers to be able to do what they need to do. And then each muscle fiber is surrounded by a connective tissue layer called endomysium. And we're going to get into the naming of these a little bit later. So you can see another really good diagram of these different layers and levels of organization of the muscle tissue. You'll remember that we talked about this is going to be a cross-section of a particular muscle. If you'll remember, this is one of our elbow flexors on the thumb side of the arm. You can see it on the anterior and posterior aspect of the arm, and it is the brachioradialis muscle. So you can see the entire muscle here surrounded by the epimysium right in here, the tendon inserting into that there, blood vessels and nerves running through the perimysium, and this is just a cross-section of the same skeletal muscle right in here. And then you bring it down to this little pepperoni pizza muscle fascicle, which you can see up in here. And you can see, so the muscle fascicle is here, epimysium surrounding the whole thing, endomysium surrounding just these little muscle fibers right in here, each individual muscle fiber, and then the perimysium is all this sort of bluish white stuff in here. So then our second learning objective is I can rank from weakest to strongest the connective tissue of a skeletal muscle. And the different types are endomysium, epimysium, fascia, and perimysium. And you'll remember that we didn't talk about fascia in the previous few slides. That's one that you're not going to be tested on. It's not going to be necessary for you to know going forward, but it is, I think, an interesting extra little aspect to what we're talking about. So the first layer that we're going to talk about is the very, very inner layer surrounding just these myofibers, the endomysium. If you remember, we can break these words down to their Latin and usually Latin and Greek roots. Endomysium can be broken down to endo, meaning within, and that new root word mys, meaning muscle. This is going to be our deepest layer of connective tissue right in here. Sorry, this is actually our perimysium. So our endomysium can be found right in here or in these interstitial spaces right there. So it's our deepest layer of connective tissue. It has the lowest amount of strength of the different types that we're going to be talking about. It is our loose connective tissue, the tissue type that we talked about earlier. It contains a mix of fibers and capillaries. Those capillaries are the reason it is one of the most essential of all of the connective tissue types. As I talked about earlier, these are all vascular tissue, so there's got to be blood supply and oxygen running to all of this stuff to be able to work the way it needs to work. I like this diagram a lot because you can see how multinucleate these myofibers are. You can see how many nuclei are running through here, which is not visible in a lot of the other diagrams. So next we have our perimysium. It's highlighted right here. You can see it in the interstitial spaces between the different fascicles right in here, as well as surrounding the fascicle right in this area. Peri, of course, meaning about or around, as in the word perimeter, would be a good example of that. Mys, again, meaning muscle. So this is going to surround our fascicles or our clusters of myofibers. It's got moderate strength. It's composed of collagen fibers, so it's a little bit more durable than endomysium, and it is also vascular, just like our endomysium. So next we have our epimysium. Epi, of course, meaning upon, and mys, again, meaning muscle, and that's going to surround the entire muscle all the way around this perimeter here. It's all vascular, all arteries and veins running through it. And it's got very, very high strength. It's going to be one of our dense, irregular connective tissues, or made up of overlapping collagen fibers. We've discussed before that it looks a little bit like uncooked meat with a lot of light and dark areas. It's a little bit mottled because of the way that those collagen fibers are arranged. Now, it's got to have the most strength because it's continuous with the tendon. And when you're lifting weights or putting a lot of pressure on your muscles, it has to be able to pull with those tendons and to be able to maintain that strength and maintain that structure in the muscle without severe tears or injuries. Now finally, we're going to talk about the fascia. Now fascicles we're seeing in here as bundles or bands of muscle tissues, but it is also a root word meaning band. So our fascia is found in between the skin and the muscle. It has the highest strength of all of these different connective tissue types. It's dense, regular connective tissue, which we've discussed before are composed of organized collagen fibers. You're going to find those more as sheets which surround an entire muscle and isolate the muscles from the surrounding tissues and the surrounding organs. So let's just rewind and go back over our structure from start to finish. So first, surrounding the whole muscle, we have the epimysium, that collection of connective tissue, which provides the greatest amount of strength after the fascia, of course, but you don't have to know that for your tests. So the greatest amount of strength because it's made of dense, irregular connective tissue and surrounds the whole muscle. So next we have the skeletal muscle itself, so the skeletal muscle being the entire structure. Within that skeletal muscle, underneath the epimysium, is our perimysium, and that's made up of collagen fibers and has moderate strength. It's more durable than the endomysium, less durable than the epimysium. And the perimysium surrounds the fascicles, which are bundles of myofibers. And within those fascicles surrounding each myofiber is the endomysium, and that's made up of loose connective tissue, and it provides blood supply in the form of capillaries to our myofibers.